Hey guys, I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the season finale of the Book of Boba Fett and the series as a whole. I'm going to break it down into two parts, the parts that I liked about this episode and the parts that didn't really work with this episode, and then talk a little bit about how I felt the season overall went. Let's kick off with the things that I actually really enjoyed from the episode. The pairing of Mando and Boba Fett and having them use all their tech from their wrist rockets to jetpacks to the whistling birds, all that sort of stuff. That was a really cool scene. Watching them work in tandem, support each other, I thought it was a really, really cool scene. It just shows that when they're together, they're a great fighting force, and I'd really like to see that continue, whether it's in another season of the Book of the Mandalorian or a new season of Mandalorian itself or some other show. I love their pairing together. I think they complement each other very, very well. Mando's a little bit more methodical, Boba's a little bit more chaotic, but together they work really, really well in tandem. And it was great to see, and it was really well shot, surprisingly well shot. While it felt a little unearned because we didn't spend any time building up to this moment, watching Fett tear through the streets of Mos Espa on the back of a Rancor was really friggin' cool. I was really surprised by the mobility of the Rancor. I don't think we've ever seen that before, watching it jump around a little bit like a monkey jumping from building to building. And the blending of the practical effects with the CG was really, really well done. It looked absolutely incredible. As cool as this moment was, I thought it was a little unearned, given that we hadn't spent any time building up to this moment. We didn't see any of the training between Boba and the Rancor. We just sort of got that initial scenes back in episode 3, and that was it. So it felt a little jarring, given that we were told by the Danny Trejo character that it would take a lot of work for Boba to successfully ride the Rancor. I also questioned why Fett went back for the Rancor instead of his gunship. I really feel like although they mentioned that conventional weapons weren't going to work on the Scorpion droids, I felt like something like surely a missile from the gunship or even a seismic charge, even though that might have been a little bit of overkill, I think that would have been much more effective at neutralizing the threat of the Pikes. Another highlight of the episode was anytime Cad Bane was on screen. He absolutely chews up scenery and he's got such an iconic voice, and anytime he and Fett were interacting really helped elevate the scene and build a sense of tension, which I absolutely loved. Their final duel was a great action set piece, and it was one of the few instances where the Tusken Raider storyline actually paid off, with Boba Fett using the gaffy stick to finish off Cad Bane. I really hope we get to see Cad Bane again in another live action show, potentially Kenobi or Andor. It'd be such a waste if this is the last time that we see him on screen. The resolution of that scene though did let it down a little bit. I felt like it was essentially a retread of the Mudhorn fight where Grogu lifted up the Mudhorn for Mando to finish it, and here he's obviously putting the Rancor to sleep. But I can sort of excuse it because of how adorable it was watching him go up to the Rancor and sort of go, "Good little Rancor," and then curl up next to it for a nap. I thought that was a really cute touch that just really paid off well. Lastly, it was really cool to see why Fenix Chand is regarded as a master assassin, watching her take out the heads of the crime families, the mayor and the head of the Pikes. It would have been a little bit more fitting if it was Boba Fett, given that Boba Fett was the one that actually had the grudge against the Pikes and the other crime families. But overall, it was a really cool scene. It was actually quite dark watching the mayor get garroted up to the roof. But it was really, really cool to see her get a nice little action set piece as well. And now on to the things that didn't really work for this episode or the season as a whole. One of the things that I feel really let it down was just the inconsistent storytelling. One of my biggest complaints about this episode and this season as a whole is that we spent so much time at the start of the series world building around the Tusken culture, having them take in Fett and give him a sense of renewed purpose and direction. The show spends an entire episode building Fett's relationship with the Tuskens. We learn about their culture, their history, what they're after. Fett gives an impassioned speech about how Tatooine is their land and that they shouldn't have to hide, and it makes us believe that potentially he might be the one to unite the Tusken tribes, to reclaim Tatooine from the crime lords and all the other forces. But then they're discarded. The very next episode they're completely cast aside, and we're left going, what was the point of that? Why did we spend so much time building that relationship? Because now we're going to have to spend time establishing new allies for Fett. And that leaves us with questions. Why bother spending time developing the Tusken Raider storyline at all? Fett was still going to go to war with the Pikes over who got control of Tatooine. What did that benefit the storyline? Much in the same way, we're introduced to the Hutts in episode 2, and they look like a really intriguing fighting force to go against Fett. But they're put aside and we're left with the Pikes as the big bad of the series. But again, no time is put into establishing why they're a credible threat, why we should fear the Pike Syndicate. I don't think the humour worked really well in this episode or the series as a whole. It felt very Marvel-esque in terms of being very quippy and not really naturally worked into the story like, say, Grogu in Season 2 with the Frog Ladies, eating the Frog Ladies' eggs. Scenes with the Twilight trying to negotiate a treaty, or Pelimoto rocking up to the middle of a battle being completely surprised and unaware that there's explosions going on, just break the tension in an episode where the tension should be absolutely sky high given the stakes. In the action scenes, oh god, they felt so repetitive, just hiding behind walls or speeders, taking pot shots. Everything felt very static. There was no movement, there was no sort of tactics to it. It was just one side over here, taking pot shots at each other. It was boring. A lot of the action felt very unimaginative, like the scenes between the mod gang and the villagers of Freetown when they were pinned down in that little courtyard against the Pikes. All the Pikes would need to do is to throw a grenade in there or something to flush them out or to finish them off, but instead they just stay behind their walls and they just take pot shots, and it's just the same thing over and over and over again. They could have clearly trimmed like a minute or 2 or 3 from these scenes and nothing would have really been lost in terms of storytelling. The battle had a very predictable flow to it, and I feel like we've seen it elsewhere where the good guys get the upper hand, they cheer and they're all celebrating, and then a bigger threat comes in. And then they get the upper hand again and they cheer some more, and then a bigger threat comes in. It was all just very lazy. While the Scorpion droids were a really cool design, I think they were an unused concept from Attack of the Clones. They never really felt like a threat. They couldn't seem to hit anything, they were really slow. And it was really just they couldn't hit anything, where people were running down long streets in straight lines, but all they could do was just fire at the walls around them. They never really seemed to be an actual threat. Boba Fett's story then wraps up rather abruptly. It just sort of finishes. And he says that he feels like they're not very well suited towards this, leading the people of Tatooine. It almost feels like it's a little bit of a meta commentary on the show as a whole, like, what was the point of all of this? Was it really worth it? The mid-credits scene with Vanth in the Bacta tank was also a bit of a weird choice. From memory, he seemed to have gotten shot in the shoulder, so I'm not quite sure why he needs body modification. But I'm interested to see where it goes. But in terms of like a reveal per se, it wasn't that interesting. They could have chucked that anywhere in the episode and it wouldn't have felt out of place. Overall, I think the show was okay. I enjoyed parts of it, other parts not so much. But let me know in the comments down below what you think of the season finale and the show as a whole. And I'll catch you next time. See ya!